Welcome to the University of Michigan Dentistry Podcast Series, promoting oral health care worldwide.
Today I'm going to talk about the sharpening of curettes, sickles, and hoes. These instruments are sharpened to maintain the original bevels of the instrument so that efficient operation may be possible in the mouth. These instruments are sharpened with the aid of a sharpening stone. A sharpening stone consists of sharp cutting points, each harder than steel. And they come in many shapes and sizes. The one that we use here at the University of Michigan is a flat Arkansas stone. Now let me switch to the chart here to further explain what a sharp instrument is. Sharpening means to grind the surface which forms the blade edge until a fine cutting edge is restored. No distortion of the edges or the bevels or the angles of the instrument should occur. Well, what is a sharp edge? A sharp edge means that the edges or the lateral sides of the instrument and the face of the instrument intersect at a sharp angle. Generally, this angle is about 70 degrees. This angle forms a line when projected out in this manner and not a surface, so no light should be reflected from it. The edge of the instrument is sharp when that bright line disappears. Now let me show you on an actual instrument what this line would look like. What I want you to understand here is the look of sharpness rather than the feel of sharpness. As you can see on the instrument on the left, which is sharp, the intersection between the face of the instrument and the lateral surface of the instrument is a line, and it does not reflect light. The instrument on the right, however, is a dull instrument, and there is a surface formed between the face of the instrument and the lateral surface of the instrument. Sharp instruments are generally more efficient than dull instruments, although each of these instruments produce essentially the same surface roughness. At the first sign of dullness, you should sharpen instruments because it saves valuable instruments from waste by grinding. There are many methods of sharpening, and all will give excellent results if you have the acquired skills. The hand methods of sharpening instruments are probably more conservative, and they are less expensive for sharpening instruments. They are easier to master, and they are safer for instruments and fingers. Let me show you just a little bit about some of the sharpening stones that are used. As I mentioned before, we tend to use the harder stones, and we tend to use the hand stones rather than the rotating instruments. Rotating instruments will sharpen the instruments just fine, except that they take more instrument with them when you sharpen the instrument. The stones should not be used over a prolonged period of time because all of them have a tendency to wear, and as they wear, they will groove. And you can see in this stone here, there's a groove right down the middle of the stone. The problem with using a grooved stone like this is that you end up with a grooved instrument, which can damage the original cutting edges and bevels of the instrument. It's important to know the shape of the instrument that you're going to sharpen. These are the three instruments most sharpened in periodontics: the curettes, the sickles, and the hoes. The files cannot be sharpened to any degree of satisfaction and must be sent back to the factory to get sharpened. It's important to use the proper size and shape of stone and to keep the stone in a constant plane toward the instrument. In sharpening, I would put the instrument on a firm surface because if the instrument is constantly bumping around, you will not get the proper surface when sharpening. The other thing that's important is to take the oil stone and to place a small amount of oil on it. Then I would remove the excess oil, and when sharpening the instrument, the idea is to maintain approximately a 70-degree bevel between the face of the instrument and the lateral side of the instrument. I would take the sharpening stone and use a light touch with short back and forth strokes. I would check the instrument frequently to make sure that we're sharpening toward the desired bevel. If you use a light touch, you will not build up heat at the cutting edge of the instrument and therefore ruin the temper of the instrument. The surface of the blade is reduced by sharpening, but no new bevels should be created. And I would sharpen against the edge mainly toward the end of the sharpening process so as to avoid feathering the edge. The sides of the instrument, when you're sharpening them, should remain, if it's a curette, should remain parallel to one another. In other words, this surface here and this surface here should remain parallel. Let me switch to some graphics here to show you in further detail how to sharpen the various instruments. On this cross-section of a curette scaler, you can see the approximate angle at which the sharpening stone would be placed. The angle between the face of the instrument and the sharpening stone should be approximately 70 degrees. When moving the sharpening stone back and forth across the face of the working edge of the instrument, you should see oil begin to accumulate on the face of the instrument when the instrument becomes sharp. Generally, when the instruments are sharpened, we begin to look for a couple of things. We look for the oil to come on the surface. We look for the disappearance of light reflecting from this line. You should try to maintain a flat line here where the sharpening stone has been moved. And the reason that you look for a flat line is to indicate that you have not arced the sharpening stone when you used it. Arcing of the sharpening stone tends to take away much more instrument than is necessary. Now, once this flat line has been produced here, you'll also have a fairly acute angle at the base of the curette scaler. You can take and round this out just slightly to recontour this area. Now let me switch to a graphic of the curette scalers to show you how sharpening instructions pertain to curette scalers themselves. The curette scaler, as you remember, has two parallel working edges, or cutting edges. Every attempt should be made to maintain the parallelism of these cutting edges. If the cutting edges are maintained in a parallel fashion, the tip end of the instrument will not be pointed, it will be rounded. Looking over here to this cross-section of a curette, you'll notice that the angle between the face and the lateral sides, again, is 70 degrees. This angle should be maintained, and the rounded underneath surface of the instrument should also be maintained. So when you finish sharpening the instrument, you should see the face, you should see a fairly straight angle here, rounded slightly as you approach the underneath side of the instrument. Now let me show you on a graphic of the sickle scalers how sharpening instructions pertain to the use of sickle scalers. The sickle scaler, you remember, has a different shape at the base than the curette scalers. There is a pointed base. But in sharpening the sickle scalers, you should again try to create a 70-degree angle between the face of the instrument and the lateral sides. This 70-degree angle forms the cutting edge of the instrument. The reason that 70 degrees is picked upon as an angle is because if we have, say, a 90-degree angle here, the efficiency of the cutting edge will be reduced. On the other hand, if there is a very acute cutting edge, you may gouge the tooth with the side of the instrument. It's important when sharpening the sickle scalers not only to maintain the cutting edge, but to also move them so that you maintain the tip of the instrument as well. Maintaining the angle at the base of the instrument is not important because this angle is not used for scaling. Let me now show you some of the unique characteristics of the hose. The hose can be sharpened by, again, holding them with the face of the instrument parallel to the floor and moving the stone back and forth at approximately a 70-degree angle to the face of the instrument. This forms the bevel of the instrument. Now, hose have some unique difficulties, usually when they come from the factory. And one of these is that this edge here is quite sharp. Most hose need to be modified to prevent gouging of the tooth surface from this edge. And what I would suggest you do is take a white stone mounted in a handpiece and just round this edge. Once you have rounded that edge ever so slightly, then I would take a sulci wheel and polish up the edge of the hoe. Sometimes it is necessary, in addition to refining these angles between the face of the instrument, the bevel of the instrument, and the lateral side, it is necessary to refine the angle at the base of the instrument. And the eventual shape that you should look for should be a fairly rounded underneath surface, which permits the hoe to be inserted in the pocket without causing soft tissue trauma. Now let me talk a little bit about the care of stones. It's important to keep the stones oiled because what it tends to do is it tends to float off the particles of steel as you sharpen the instrument. Let me show you here on two stones, one which is very clean, the other which is very dirty, what happens to stones when you use them to sharpen instruments. The steel particles, even on an oil stone, will tend to accumulate in the pores of the stone slightly. And you can see here, particularly in this area here, that there is a lot of accumulation of steel particles there, and it's what we call glazing of the stone. And the glazing of the stone reduces the cutting efficiency of the stone. So it's important that you frequently oil the stone. If there's been a marked amount of glazing, putting the stone in a commercial solvent of any kind, probably starred solvent, will tend to clean the stone and restore the surface of the stone again. Many times it helps to put it in a small vial and put the vial in an ultrasonic cleaner to clean the stone entirely. These stones may be either autoclaved or boiled in oil, and generally I think I would tend to keep the stone in oil so that it constantly absorbs the oil and has oil impregnated all the way through the stone. If the surface of the stone really becomes badly abraded and grooved, it's possible to restore the working surface of the stone using an abrasive cloth or paper. Let me just make a few summary comments about instrument sharpening. Following the use of the instrument, the cutting edge should be examined. If it is found to be dull, then the cutting edge should be sharpened. In sharpening the instruments, you should be careful to maintain the original shape of the instrument. The idea is not to change the shape of the instrument, but to maintain the original contours. The instrument will get smaller as you sharpen it, but the shape of the instrument should stay the same. Once the instruments have been sharpened, then the instruments should be autoclaved. All of the scalers that we use here are made from stainless steel. Stainless steel, although it is quite strong, does not tend to hold an edge for a long period of time. So it is important that you sharpen instruments frequently, and this will mean probably that you will sharpen instruments after each use.
You've been listening to a presentation from the University of Michigan School of Dentistry, which is dedicated to supporting open learning and open educational resources. This recording is licensed under the Creative Commons. It may be reused and redistributed for nonprofit use. Please attribute materials to the University of Michigan School of Dentistry and redistribute under this same license. For more information on how this and other University of Michigan School of Dentistry recordings may be used, visit www.dent.umich.edu/license.